We don't do charity walk-ins for black people, sweetheart.
Charles Pendergast sneered, tossing a cheap, wrinkled brochure right onto her lap while towering over her with pure condescension.
Our private wealth accounts require real investable assets, not whatever petty change you scrape together to buy that coat. People like you keep thinking you can just stroll into a 122-year-old bank and belong here. No, you don't. Blair, call security and get this woman out of our lobby before she embarrasses our real clients.
Imani Adeyemi didn't blink. She sat perfectly still on that cold leather bench beneath the oil portraits of dead white billionaires, letting the raw humiliation echo through the grand marble hall. She didn't shout. She didn't make a scene. She just watched him adjust his gold cufflinks and walk away like he'd just brushed off a piece of trash. Pendergast thought he was throwing out a penniless intruder who didn't know her place. He had absolutely no idea that the quiet black woman he just publicly degraded was Imani Adeyemi, the sole owner of a $14 billion financial empire, and in exactly 90 seconds, she was going to lay down a single piece of paper that would burn his entire multi-billion-dollar bank down to the absolute ground. Man, you have got to see how this reckoning went down. Welcome back to Black Stories, where true dignity takes back power and hidden wealth turns the tables on the arrogant. If you are ready to watch absolute, cold-blooded justice get served to those who look right through us, smash that subscribe button right now. Let's go back to 8:40 in the morning. A gray Tuesday in November, where this massive corporate empire made the biggest mistake in its history. But before that single sheet of paper ever touched the marble, you need to understand something. You need to understand why a woman worth $14 billion would walk into the most powerful private bank in Manhattan completely alone. No entourage, no lawyers trailing behind her, no security detail clearing her path. Because the truth is, Imani Adeyemi wasn't walking into that building to open an account. She was walking back to reclaim something that had been stolen from her family a long, long time ago. And to understand that, I have to take you back further than that gray Tuesday morning. I have to take you all the way back to the beginning. Imani Adeyemi was born in Newark, New Jersey, in a narrow brick row house with a furnace that groaned all winter, and a kitchen table where her father did the books for his business by hand. Every single night, under a lamp, with a cracked green shade. Her father's name was Elias Adeyemi. He had come to this country from Nigeria with one suitcase, a mathematics degree that nobody here would honor, and a stubbornness that bordered on the supernatural. He took jobs other men wouldn't take. He saved money other men would have spent, and over 18 brutal years, brick by brick, contract by contract, Elias Adeyemi built a textile manufacturing company called Adeyemi Mills. By the time Imani was a teenager, Adeyemi Mills employed 140 people. 140 families ate dinner every night because of what her father built with his bare hands. He paid fair wages. He hired people nobody else would hire. Ex-offenders, immigrants, single mothers, the invisible people of that city. And he used to sit Imani down at that kitchen table, push his ledgers toward her, and teach her how money actually worked. Not the way they teach it in classrooms. The real way. The way the powerful keep it and the powerless lose it. And every night, before he closed those books, he would say the same 3 words to his daughter. He'd tap the ledger with one finger, look her dead in the eye, and say, "Dignity is leverage." She didn't understand it at 9 years old. She didn't understand it at 13. But she would understand it. Oh, she would come to understand those 3 words better than anyone alive. Here is what Imani Adeyemi understood, that his daughter would one day weaponize. He understood that respect in this world is not given freely to people who look like them. It has to be built, banked, and held in reserve, like capital. He understood that when you are underestimated, that misjudgment is not just an insult. It is an opening, a blind spot in your enemy. And he understood that a man who looks down on you cannot, by definition, see what you are actually holding in your hands. Now, here is where the story turns dark. And you need to pay attention, because everything that happened in that marble lobby flows directly from what I'm about to tell you. In 1990, Adeyemi Mills needed a bridge loan. Nothing exotic, nothing reckless. A short-term loan to cover a large order from a major retailer. The kind of loan that healthy, profitable companies take out every single day of the week. Elias had the contracts in hand. He had the collateral. He had the order. By every objective measure on paper, it was one of the safest loans a bank could make. So Imani Adeyemi put on his best suit, the gray one. He saved for church and funerals. And he walked into the most prestigious private bank in the region to ask for that loan. The name of that bank was Ashforth Vane. You heard me right. The same bank, the same marble, the same dead white billionaires staring down from the same oil portraits. And do you know what they did to Imani Adeyemi? They didn't say no. That would have been too clean, too honest. Instead, they smiled, and they delayed. They asked for one more document, and then one more, and then one more after that. They scheduled meetings and rescheduled them. They let the clock run. They let the deadline on that retail contract creep closer and closer, while they pretended to consider a loan they had already privately decided to deny. They strung a proud man along for 11 weeks. Because to them, a black immigrant's company was not a real institution. It was a curiosity, a risk to be managed, not a client to be served. And by the time they finally declined the loan, in a one-paragraph letter, with no explanation, the retail contract had collapsed. The order was gone. The cash flow seized up like an engine with no oil, and within 90 days, a profitable company that employed 140 people was forced into a fire sale. Now, here is the part that turned a tragedy into a crime. The fire sale was bought up for pennies on the dollar by a vulture fund, and that vulture fund had a quiet, comfortable, long-standing relationship with, go ahead and say it with me, Ashforth Vane. The same men who starved the company of oxygen were standing right there, ready to pick the bones, ready to buy 140 families' livelihoods for the price of a used car. They didn't just deny a loan, they engineered a theft and made it look like a market outcome. Imani Adeyemi never recovered. Not financially. He clawed his way back to a modest living. But something inside the man broke that year, and it never quite healed. He died in 1998, far too young. With one regret, he confessed to his daughter from a hospital bed. He told her he was not angry that he lost. He was angry that he never made them look him in the eye. He was angry that they got to look right through him, all the way to the very end. as if he were a piece of furniture, as if his life's work were a rounding error on someone's spreadsheet. And then he reached over to the chair beside his bed, and he handed his daughter an old oxblood leather folder, cracked and soft from 20 years of his hands. Inside it was a Parker pen, and tucked into the back sleeve, behind a flap most people would never even find, was a single share certificate. One share, the very last share of Adeyemi Mills that had ever been issued in his name, the only piece of his empire they never managed to take. He pressed that folder into her hands, and with the very last of his strength, he gave her one final instruction. He said one word, a word in his own language, a word his own mother had taught him as a boy. He said, Sankofa. Sankofa. It is a word from the Akan people of West Africa, and it means, roughly, this: go back and reclaim what was lost. It means the past is not behind you. It means you are permitted? No. You are obligated to return for what was taken and to carry it forward into the future. Go back and get it. Imani Adeyemi was 24 years old, holding her dying father's hand. When she received those two assignments, dignity is leverage, and Sankofa, go back and reclaim what was lost. She spent the next 22 years doing exactly that. She put herself through school. She earned a scholarship, and then another, and then a graduate degree in finance from a university that would have rejected her father's credentials without a second thought. She went to work on Wall Street, and she learned the trade from the inside. The leveraged buyout, the distressed debt play, the recapitalization, the art of finding value in things that powerful men had written off as worthless. She was very, very good at it. But more than that, she was patient. She had a kind of patience that frightened people, because it never looked like weakness, and it never looked like fear. It looked like a woman who had already decided how the story ended, and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. By the time she was 38, Imani Adeyemi had founded her own firm. She named it Sankofa Capital Partners. Go back and reclaim what was lost. And in the years that followed, that firm became one of the most quietly powerful investment houses in the entire country. With $14 billion in assets under her sole control, not a committee, not a board of pale old men. Here, one woman, one signature, one final word on every deal that mattered. And here is the thing that made her a legend in the rooms that actually count, the rooms most people never see. Imani Adeyemi specialized in rescuing institutions on the edge of collapse. When a great old company was bleeding out, when a famous old bank had made one catastrophic mistake too many and needed a lifeline that no one else could provide, the name that got whispered across mahogany tables was always the same. Get me Sankofa. Get me Adeyemi. But almost nobody in that world had ever actually met her. She did her diligence through intermediaries. She signed under the initial M. For a middle name, she rarely used, so that her work would be judged on its numbers and never on her face. She let the powerful men of finance assume whatever they wanted to assume about who M. Adeyemi was, and what they assumed, almost without exception, was that M. Adeyemi was a man, a serious man, probably an older man, certainly not a black woman from a brick row house in Newark. Holding her dead father's leather folder, she let them think it. Because, you see, her father had taught her that being underestimated is not an insult. It is an opening. Now, let me bring you to that gray Tuesday in November. And let me tell you what was really happening behind the marble walls of Ashforth Vane. Because the firm that humiliated Imani in its lobby was, at that very moment, secretly drowning. Ashforth Vane was 122 years old. It managed nearly $300 billion for the oldest and richest families in America. Its lobby had marble floors quarried in Italy, ceilings painted by hand, and a wall of oil portraits going back 5 generations. Every one of them, a white man in a dark suit. Every one of them looking down on whoever walked through the door. The bank carried itself as if it were eternal, as if it were a law of nature rather than a business. But underneath that marble, the floor was rotting. For 4 years, Ashforth Vane had been making increasingly reckless bets to prop up the returns it had promised its clients. A series of those bets had gone catastrophically wrong. The bank had a hole in its balance sheet. A real, terrifying, bottomless hole. And it had been hiding that hole with accounting tricks and short-term borrowing and a great deal of prayer. The firm was, in plain English, weeks away from a collapse that would have ended a century-old institution and wiped out the fortunes of some of the most powerful families in the country. They had searched, desperately, and in total secrecy, for an investor large enough and bold enough to recapitalize the bank, to inject the billions of dollars needed to fill that hole before the regulators or the press caught the scent of blood. They had been turned down by everyone except one firm, one investor willing to consider it, willing to be the anchor, willing to write a check large enough to save them. That investor was Sankofa Capital. That investor was Imani Adeyemi. And so, on that gray Tuesday morning, the board of Ashforth Vane was gathered on the 40th floor, in a glass conference room, with a view of the entire city, waiting for their savior to arrive. They had prepared coffee in silver pots. They had laid out the closing documents. The chairman of the bank, a 71-year-old patrician named Bennett Ashforth, the great-great-grandson of the man who founded the place, had personally instructed that their guest be received with the utmost courtesy. The single most important client in the history of the firm was coming to sign the papers that would keep the lights on. There was just one problem. The board, and especially the man who ran the private wealth division, had spent weeks picturing exactly who that savior would be. And the picture in their heads was of a man, a distinguished, gray-haired man in a bespoke suit. They had never once considered the possibility that the M in M. Adeyemi stood in front of a mirror that morning in a quiet apartment, fixing the collar of a perfectly nice but deliberately unflashy wool coat, and was, in fact, a 46-year-old black woman, holding an old oxblood leather folder, on her way to go back and reclaim what was lost. Now, stay with me, because this is the moment the whole thing turns. This is where dignity meets arrogance in a marble lobby. And one of them is about to find out what the other one was really holding. At 8:40 in the morning, Imani Adeyemi pushed through the heavy brass and glass doors of Ashforth Vane and stepped into that cathedral of money. Her shoes were sensible. Her coat was warm and well made, but carried no logo. No flash. Nothing that announced a price. She wore almost no jewelry, and tucked under her arm, the way another woman might carry a clutch, was the cracked oxblood leather folder her father had pressed into her hands 22 years before. She did not look like $300 billion. She looked to the people in that lobby like someone who had wandered in out of the cold, and the people in that lobby noticed her immediately, in the way that people notice something they have already decided does not belong. She walked to the front desk, where a young receptionist sat beneath a wall of those oil portraits. Imani gave her name, calmly and clearly. She said she had a 9 o'clock appointment on the 40th floor. She said she was expected. The receptionist's eyes did a thing Imani had seen 10,000 times in her life. They flicked down to the coat, and the shoes, and the folder, and then back up to her face, and then something cooled behind them. The young woman gave a tight little smile and said she didn't see the name on the morning's executive calendar, and asked, in a tone you use for a delivery driver, "Note a client." Whether Imani was quite sure she had the right building, Imani said. Simply that she was sure. She asked the receptionist to please call up to the chairman's office. The receptionist said the chairman's office was very busy this morning with an extremely important meeting, and that perhaps Imani could leave her information and someone would follow up. Then she gestured, with 2 fingers, toward a leather bench against the far wall, beneath the largest of the portraits, and suggested Imani wait there. So Imani sat. She sat on that cold bench beneath the painted eyes of 5 generations of Ashforth men, and she folded her hands on top of her father's folder, and she waited. And here is what I need you to understand about that wait, because it is the whole point. She was not confused. She was not lost. She knew exactly what was happening, because it was the exact same thing that had happened to her father in that exact same building 36 years earlier. They were letting the clock run. They were making her small. They were betting that if they ignored her long enough, she would feel the shame they wanted her to feel. And she would get up, and she would leave, and she would never make anyone in that building look her in the eye. She waited 10 minutes, then 20. People in beautiful suits walked past her without a glance. Then 30 minutes, 45. She watched a white couple in cashmere arrive, give a name, and get escorted upstairs within 90 seconds, with a warm handshake and an offer of espresso. She kept her hands folded. She kept her back straight. She did not check her watch with any visible irritation. She simply sat, with the patience her father had taught her, the patience that frightened people, and she let them believe they were winning. And that, friend, is when Charles Pendergast saw her. Charles Pendergast III was 53 years old and ran the entire private wealth division of Ashforth Vane. He was the kind of man who had never in his life been told no by anyone who mattered to him, and who had therefore concluded that the world was arranged correctly. He wore gold cufflinks his grandfather had worn. He believed, sincerely and without a flicker of doubt, that the marble hierarchy of that bank reflected the natural order of things. He was, that morning, stretched to the absolute limit of his nerves, because the most important meeting of his career was about to begin upstairs, and a black woman in a cheap-looking coat was sitting in his lobby beneath his ancestors' portraits, making the place look untidy in front of the real clients. He did not ask her name. He did not ask her business. He had already read everything he needed to read, in the color of her skin and the cut of her coat. He walked over, and he loomed, and he reached for one of the brochures from the rack. A cheap, thin, glossy thing the bank kept for tourists and walk-ins. It wanted to get rid of politely. And he crumpled it slightly in his hand. "We don't do charity walk-ins for black people, sweetheart," he said. And he tossed that wrinkled brochure right onto her lap. He told her the private wealth accounts required real investable assets, not whatever petty change she had scraped together to buy that coat. He told her that people like her kept thinking they could just stroll into a 122-year-old bank and belong there. He told her she didn't, and then he turned his head and called for his young associate, a junior man named Blair, eager and pale and ambitious, and told him to call security and get this woman out of the lobby before she embarrassed the real clients. And Imani Adeyemi did not blink. She sat perfectly still on that cold leather bench, beneath the oil portraits of dead white billionaires, and she let the raw humiliation roll across that marble hall like a cold wind. She did not shout. She did not make a scene. She did not reach for her phone to prove anything, or open her father's folder to flash her power, or say a single word in her own defense. She just looked at Charles Pendergast, calmly, completely, with eyes that had buried a father and built an empire. And she watched him adjust his gold cufflinks and walk away, like he'd just brushed off a piece of trash. Blair hesitated, glanced at the strange stillness of the woman on the bench, and then went to find a security guard. Because his boss had told him to, Charles Pendergast thought he had just thrown a penniless intruder out of his lobby. He had absolutely no idea that he had just publicly degraded the sole owner of a $14 billion empire, the one human being on Earth who held the future of his 122-year-old bank in the palm of her hand. And he had no idea that the clock had just started 90 seconds. That's all it would take. 40 floors up, in that glass conference room. The chairman of Ashforth Vane was getting nervous. It was 4 minutes to 9. His savior, the anchor investor, the legendary M. Adeyemi, had not yet been escorted upstairs. Bennett Ashforth turned to the one person in that building he trusted more than any banker, any lawyer, any partner, his executive assistant of 26 years, a sharp and dignified Nigerian woman named Diane Okafor. He asked her to go down to the lobby personally and make sure their guest had not been kept waiting. Diane Okafor took the private elevator down. The doors slid open onto the marble lobby, and she stepped out, scanning the room for an important-looking man in a fine suit. She did not find one. What she found, instead, was a security guard walking toward a black woman seated on the bench beneath the portraits. A woman holding an old leather folder. A woman with a cheap brochure lying crumpled in her lap. A woman sitting with a stillness so total that it made the entire marble hall feel loud by comparison. Now, Diane Okafor had worked at Ashforth Vane for 26 years. She knew exactly what a black woman left to wait on that particular bench, with that particular brochure in her lap, meant she had been that woman. More than once, in more than one room, and in the half-second it took her to cross the lobby, she felt her stomach drop straight through the Italian marble. Because some instinct, older than logic, told her precisely who was sitting on that bench, she reached the guard, She put a hand on his arm and stopped him cold. And then she did something she had never once done in 26 years of perfect, invisible service. She walked past the guard, and she stood in front of that woman, and she lowered herself, this proud, 58-year-old woman in her good gray dress, until she was nearly kneeling, so that her eyes were level with the eyes of the woman on the bench. "Madam," Diane said, very quietly, her voice shaking just slightly. "Are you M? Adeyemi, are you Sankofa?" And for the first time that entire morning, something moved across Imani Adeyemi's face. Not anger, not triumph. Something gentler and far more dangerous than either. She looked at this black woman, kneeling in front of her, in the middle of that cold marble cathedral. The one person in the entire building who had bothered to come close enough to actually see her, and she gave the smallest, "Varmist note, I am," Imani said. "And you must be the only person in this building worth saving." Diane Okafor's hand flew to her mouth. The security guard, who had stopped a few feet away, went pale. Across the lobby, the young receptionist, who had pointed 2 fingers at the bench, rose halfway out of her chair. And Blair, the eager junior associate, who had just returned from fetching the guard, stood frozen, watching the temperature of the entire room change in an instant. And not understanding why, Imani Adeyemi stood up. Slowly, unhurried, she smoothed her unflashy coat, and then she did the thing the whole world was waiting for. She opened the cracked oxblood leather folder her dying father had pressed into her hands. From inside it, she removed a single sheet of paper, 1 page, crisp, heavy, cream-colored stock, with a letterhead embossed at the top that read, in quiet, dark letters, Sankofa Capital Partners. And at the bottom of that page was a signature, her signature. Above a single typed line, Imani M. Adeyemi, sole principal. That one sheet of paper was the executed commitment to recapitalize Ashforth Vane. It was the lifeline. It was $4 billion of rescue capital, ready to be wired, contingent only on the board's countersignature upstairs that very morning. It was, quite literally, the only thing standing between this 122-year-old bank and a complete, public, catastrophic collapse within the week. Imani held that single page out, not to the guard, not to the receptionist, but she placed it down, flat, on the cold marble surface of the reception desk, where everyone could see it. And then she looked at Diane Okafor, and she said, in a voice that did not rise even a single degree, "Please, tell Mr. Ashforth that the anchor investor for his recapitalization arrived at 8:40 this morning. Tell him." She gave her name at this desk and was told she had the wrong building. Tell him she sat on that bench for 49 minutes. And tell him that one of his managing partners just threw a brochure in her lap, called her a charity case in front of his lobby, and ordered security to remove her. She paused, then asked him whether he still believes Ashforth Vane is the kind of institution my capital should save. You could have heard a pin drop on that marble floor from 40 stories up, 90 seconds. That is how long it took. From the moment Charles Pendergast walked away, adjusting his gold cufflinks, for that single sheet of paper to land on the desk and detonate, and here is the beautiful, terrible truth of it. Pendergast didn't even hear the explosion yet. He was already in the elevator, on his way up to the most important meeting of his life, straightening his tie, rehearsing his charming greeting for the distinguished gentleman he just knew. Adeyemi would turn out to be, he had no idea. He had already lit the fuse on his own funeral. Diane Okafor did not take the private elevator back up. She moved. Faust. With that single sheet of paper held flat in both hands, like something sacred. And she did not knock when she reached the 40th floor. She walked straight into that glass conference room where 13 of the most powerful people in American finance were sitting around a polished table. And she walked straight to the chairman. And she set the page down in front of him. Bennett Ashforth was 71 years old. He had run that bank for 30 years. He had seen market crashes and scandals and the deaths of kings. And his face never moved. But Diane leaned down, and she whispered into his ear for about 15 seconds. And the entire room watched the color drain out of the old man's face like water out of a cracked glass. He picked up the single sheet. He read the letterhead. He read the signature at the bottom. Imani Adeyemi, Sol Principal. And then he set it down very, very carefully, the way you set down something that might go off. And he asked Diane to repeat one part. Just one part. The part about the bench and the brochure and the managing partner. And at that exact moment, at that perfect, catastrophique moment, the glass door swung open, and in walked Charles Pendergast III, beaming, hand already extended, eyes already searching the room for the distinguished gentleman he had come up to charm. "Good morning, everyone," he announced, in that warm, confident voice that had opened every door his whole life. "So sorry to keep you. Now, where is our Mr. Adeyemi? I've been so looking forward to meeting him. Sit down, Charles." Bennett Ashforth said it without looking up, and there was something in the old man's voice that Pendergast had never heard before in 30 years of working under him. It was the sound of a man who had just watched his own house catch fire. Pendergast's smile faltered. He looked around the table. Nobody would meet his eyes. The lawyers were staring at their hands. Two of the directors were looking at him with something that resembled pity. And Diane Okafor, the chairman's assistant, a woman he had walked past 10,000 times without ever once learning her name, was looking at him with an expression he could not read at all. An expression that was almost, very nearly, a smile. "Charles," the chairman said slowly, "about 49 minutes ago, a guest of this firm arrived in our lobby for a 9 o'clock appointment, the most important guest in the history of this institution. Did you, by any chance, encounter a woman downstairs this morning? And you know that feeling. You know that exact feeling. That cold, sliding, plunging feeling when the floor of your stomach gives way and you suddenly understand, all at once, in a single, horrible flash, that the worst possible version of events is the true one. That is the feeling that came over Charles Pendergast, the third in that glass room, 40 stories above the marble lobby where, 90 seconds ago, he had thrown a brochure into the lap of the woman who owned his future. His voice cracked. He tried again. The woman on the bench? The walk-in. Bennett. Surely you don't. That woman was clearly not. That woman, Bennett Ashforth said, is Imani Adeyemi. That woman is Sankofa Capital. That woman is the $4 billion. That is the only thing keeping this bank from announcing insolvency on Friday. And you, Charles, called her a charity case, threw a tourist brochure in her lap, and ordered security to drag her out of our lobby in front of God and the morning's clients. The old man finally looked up, and his eyes were terrible. Tell me I am misunderstanding. Tell me, please, that you did not just do that. Charles Pendergast did not have anything to say. For perhaps the first time in his entire gilded life, the man had no charming line, no smooth recovery, no gold cufflink gesture that could fix what he had done. He simply stood there in the doorway, the blood gone from his face, and you could watch 122 years of effortless privilege curdle into pure animal terror right there behind his eyes. And that is the precise moment the door opened a second time, and Imani Adeyemi walked into the room. She had ridden up in the private elevator. She still wore the plain wool coat. She still carried the cracked oxblood folder under her arm. And she walked into that room full of the most powerful people in American finance with the same unhurried calm she had carried on the bench downstairs. The calm of a woman who had already decided how the story ended and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. Nobody pointed her to a bench this time. Bennett Ashforth was on his feet at once, apologizing, gesturing to the seat at the head of the table. His old hands actually trembling. Imani, let him talk. She let the apology hang in the air, neither accepting it nor rejecting it. And then she set her father's oxblood folder down on that polished table, in front of the most expensive chair in the room. And she remained standing, because she had decided she would speak first. And on her feet, Mr. Ashforth, she said, before you apologize any further, I want to be very clear about something, so that no one in this room misunderstands what is about to happen. What occurred in your lobby this morning was not an accident. It was not one bad employee having one bad day. It was your institution behaving exactly the way it is built to behave when it looks at someone like me. Mr. Pendergast did not invent that brochure or that bench. He inherited them. He is simply the man who was honest enough, out loud, to say what this entire bank says quietly, every single day, to every client who walks in wearing the wrong skin. The room was silent. Charles Pendergast had finally sunk into a chair against the wall, as far from the table as he could get. And I know that, Imani continued, because I did not choose Ashforth Vane at random. There are a dozen failing institutions in this city I could have rescued this quarter. I chose yours. On purpose. Because for the past 14 months, my firm has been studying you, not your balance sheet, though I know that whole better than you do. Mr. Ashforth, I mean your conduct. The way you treat the money of people who look like me. She reached into the folder and drew out a second document. This one was thick. A bound report. Hundreds of pages. You run 2 banks inside this one bank, she said. You just don't advertise the second one. The first one, you call Heritage. Heritage clients are your old families. Your portraits on the wall, they pay the lowest fees in the industry. They get your most senior managers, your best deals. First access to every opportunity that crosses this floor. The second bank, the one nobody puts on the brochure, you call Horizon. And do you know who ends up in Horizon? Black families, Latino families, immigrant families, new money with the wrong last names. Horizon clients pay nearly double the fees of heritage clients for materially worse service. They get your most junior staff. They get the deals nobody else wanted. And in many cases, they are quietly steered there the moment they walk through your doors. Sorted by appearance into the tier where you can charge them the most and respect them the least. She let that sit. Then, she said, the number, by my firm's calculation. This two-tier system extracts roughly $40 million a year. Every year, in excess fees, taken specifically from clients of color, for no reason other than the color of those clients. You have been doing it for a very long time. It is not a glitch. It is a business line. And it is. In case anyone at this table needs reminding, a flagrant, systematic, and entirely illegal violation of federal and state law. She opened the bound report to a page she had marked, and she did not read numbers this time. She told them about a person. Let me make it real for you, because I know how easy it is, in a room like this, to let $40 million become an abstraction. There is a retired school teacher named Mrs. Okonkwo, 73 years old. She and her late husband banked with Ashforth Vane for 31 years. They trusted you with the savings of 2 working lifetimes. Every dollar 2 public school salaries could put aside, raised slowly, the hard way, and for 31 years. Your machine, sorted Mrs. Okonkwo into Horizon, and quietly charged her nearly double what it charged the white family 3 names above her in the very same product, with the very same balance, over 3 decades. The difference, the money taken from a widow's retirement for no reason other than her last name and the color of her skin, came to more than $400,000. $400,000. That is not a footnote. That is a house. That is her grandchildren's education. That is years she could have stopped working. You did not steal it in one dramatic act. You stole it a little at a time, every quarter, for 31 years, while she sent you Christmas cards, thanking you for taking such good care of her. The room had gone very quiet. There are 1,100 of her, Imani said. 1,100, Mrs. Okonkwo's in your Horizon book right now, and thousands more across the years. Each one of them, a real person who trusted you. That is what $40 million a year actually is. It is not an abstraction. It has faces. And every one of those faces is a face this institution decided, the moment it walked through the door, was worth less than the ones on your wall. Now here is the part that broke the room wide open, because one of the directors, a junge man, trying to save himself, cleared his throat and said, with as much dignity as he could find, that these were very serious allegations, and that, of course, the firm would want to review them carefully and internally before anyone leapt to conclusions, and that, frankly, he found it hard to believe no one inside Ashforth Vane had ever raised such a concern if it were true. And Imani Adeyemi looked at that man, and for the first time, her calm voice carried a blade inside it. Someone did raise it. She said, his name is Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb, Imani said, is 27 years old. He grew up in Baltimore. He is the first person in his family to finish college, let alone to set foot in a place like this. 2 years ago, you hired him as a junior analyst, one of exactly 4 black analysts in a division of 200 people. And Marcus Webb was good at his job. He was so good that he was given the kind of grunt work nobody senior wants to do, which is how he ended up. Late one night, reconciling fee schedules across client accounts, and Marcus being young and honest and not yet broken by this place. Notice something that all of you had trained yourselves not to see. He noticed that 2 clients with nearly identical portfolios were paying wildly different fees, and the only thing that was different about them was their names and their faces. You could feel the room understand what was coming. So Marcus Webb did the right thing, the brave thing, the thing every compliance handbook in this building tells employees to do. He documented it carefully. He took it to his manager, and when his manager told him to drop it, he took it to compliance. And when compliance buried it, he put it in writing, formally, in an email, because he believed, God help him, he actually believed that a 122-year-old institution would want to know that it was breaking the law. Imani's voice was very quiet now. And do you know what this institution did to Marcus Webb? You did not frame him. You did not accuse him of stealing. You were far too sophisticated for anything so crude. Instead, you simply erased him. Overnight. His projects were reassigned. His manager began documenting performance concerns in a man who had been rated outstanding the month before. He was moved to a windowless desk. He was left off every meeting that mattered. He was passed over, frozen out, and quietly made to understand that he had no future here. And when, after months of that slow suffocation, he finally resigned because he could not breathe anymore, you made sure the whisper followed him. Difficult. Not a team player. Doesn't fit the culture. He has not been able to get a serious job in this industry since. A 27-year-old man who told you the truth walked out of this building carrying everything he owned in a single cardboard box. And you congratulated yourselves on a problem solved. She turned and looked directly at Charles Pendergast. Slumped in his chair against the wall, you were his division head. Mr. Pendergast, you signed the performance review that ended his career. I have a copy of it. I have a copy of his original email. 2. The one he sent before you erased him. I have the fee schedules, he flagged. I have the bonus pool data that shows exactly how much money your 2-tier machine generated and exactly which of the men in this room were paid out of it. She tapped the thick-bound report on the table. It is all in here. 14 months of work. Every document. Every dollar. Every name. And then Imani Adeyemi delivered the part that ended it. The part that turned a humiliation into a reckoning. Because a reckoning, you understand, is not the same thing as revenge. Revenge is loud and small. A reckoning is quiet and total. A reckoning is when the books finally balance. Now, she said, I imagine some of you are already thinking about lawyers, about how to manage this, about whether a single investor, however large, can really do anything to a 122-year-old institution. So, let me save your lawyers some time. She held up one finger. First, 2 weeks ago, my firm filed a detailed, evidenced complaint regarding the Heritage and Horizon fee structure with the Securities and Exchange Commission and a parallel complaint with the New York State Attorney General. Those filings are sitting on desks in Washington and Albany right now. I controlled the timing of when they would become active. Not anymore. As of 9 o'clock this morning, about 4 minutes ago, they are live. The investigations are no longer hypothetical. They have begun. She held up a second finger. Second, you have all spent the last month believing that I needed to give you $4 billion, that you were the seller and I was the buyer, hat in hand, begging to be allowed to save you. Let me correct that. Over the past 14 months, while you were drowning and looking for a lifeline, my firm has been quietly acquiring your distressed debt and your outstanding preferred shares through a series of intermediaries you never connected to one another. I did not come here this morning to ask permission to become your anchor investor. She paused, and the silence in that glass room was the loudest thing in Manhattan. I came here to inform you that I already control enough of this institution to decide its future, with or without your signatures. The recapitalization was never a favor I was requesting. It was a key I already held. Bennett Ashforth sat down very slowly in his chair. I own you. Imani Adeyemi, without raising her voice at all. I have for some time. You simply never bothered to look closely enough at the people you assumed were beneath you to notice. The younger director who had challenged her earlier made one last attempt not to fight her now, but to understand. The way a man stares at the wreckage of a bridge and asks how it could possibly have fallen. How? He asked her. Was it even possible? They had teams. They had surveillance on their own register. How could a single firm accumulate control of a 122-year-old bank without anyone noticing? And Imani Adeyemi gave him the answer. And in giving it, she taught that entire room the lesson her father had spent his whole life trying to teach the world. Because you were not looking, she said. That is the whole of it. You were not looking. Because you do not watch things you have already decided are beneath you. For 14 months, my firm bought your distressed paper in small, unremarkable pieces, through 11 different intermediaries, none of whom appeared connected to one another, several of whom carried names so plain and so unthreatening that your own analysts waved them through without a second glance. You were watching for a predator. You were watching for a man like yourselves, moving the way you would move, loudly, all at once, with a flag planted and a press release. You never once imagined the danger would arrive quietly. In sensible shoes, in a coat with no logo. The same way you never imagined that the woman on your bench was anything other than what her skin told you she was. She let that land. My father taught me that being underestimated is not an insult. It is an opening, a blind spot in the people who hold the power. Every single month that you looked through me, you were giving me cover to take another piece of you. Your contempt was not only cruelty, gentlemen, it was operational security. For me, you built the very blind spot I walked through, and you built it out of your own certainty that people like me could never possibly be a threat. I did not have to hide from you. You hid me from yourselves. She turned the thick-bound report a quarter turn on the polished table. So the title faced the room. You want to know how a black woman quietly took control of Ashforth Vane while 200 of your people guarded the gates. She walked in through the one door you never watch. The door marked, "Not worth watching." You have been leaving that door wide open for 122 years. I am simply the first person who decided to walk back through it and take what was stolen. For a long moment, nobody in that glass room could speak. The most powerful people in American finance sat in total silence while a black woman in a plain wool coat held their century-old empire in the palm of her hand. And it was Bennett Ashforth finally, who asked the question. The old man's voice was barely a whisper. He asked her why. Why this bank? Of all the institutions she could have chosen, why had she spent 14 months and untold millions hunting Ashforth Vane in particular? And this is the moment Imani Adeyemi had been walking toward for 22 years. She opened the oxblood folder one last time. She did not take out a report this time, or a filing, or a fee schedule. She reached into the back sleeve, behind a flap most people would never find, and she drew out a single, yellowed, the fragile piece of paper, a share certificate, old, soft at the edges, from being handled by a dying man. She held it up so the room could see it. "This," she said, "is a share certificate for a company called Adeyemi Mills, a textile manufacturer. 140 employees. At its height, fair wages, good work, built from absolutely nothing by a man who came to this country with one suitcase and a mathematics degree. Your firm would not have wiped its shoes on. That man's name was Elias Adeyemi. He was my father." She let the name settle over the room. "In the spring of 1990, my father walked into the lobby of this bank. That lobby. Downstairs. Beneath those same portraits. Wearing his best gray suit. To ask for a routine bridge loan against a signed retail contract. A safe loan. A profitable loan. And the men who ran Ashforth Vane looked at my father. A black immigrant in a borrowed-looking suit. And they decided, before he opened his mouth, exactly who he was and exactly what he was worth. So they did not say no. They smiled, and they delayed. For 11 weeks, they asked for one more document, and then one more. While the clock ran out on his contract, while his company suffocated, while 140 families' livelihoods drained away, and when they had finally strangled the life out of Adeyemi Mills, a vulture fund that did its banking right here, in this building, bought the corpse for pennies. Her voice never rose. But the room had gone cold. They did not just deny my father alone. They engineered the destruction of his life's work. And then their friends profited from the ruins. And the thing that haunted my father until the day he died, the thing he told me from his hospital bed in 1998, was not that he had lost. It was that they never once had to look him in the eye. They got to look right through him, all the way to the end, as if he were nothing, as if he were a brochure to be tossed in a lap, as if he were a woman left to wait on a bench. She set the share certificate down on the polished table, gently, in front of Bennett Ashforth. "When my father gave me this certificate," she said, "he gave me one word, a word from his mother's people, Sankofa. It means, go back and reclaim what was lost. He did not ask me to burn this place down. He was a better man than that. He asked me only to go back, and to make you look me in the eye. Then Imani Adeyemi straightened to her full height, and she said the 3 words she had been carrying for 22 years. The 3 words that this entire reckoning had been built upon. Brick by patient brick. The way her father built his company. She looked around that table, at the inheritors of the men who had ruined him, and she said, I am Sankofa. I am the daughter of the man you erased. I am the return on an investment you thought you wrote off 36 years ago. Everything that has happened to you this morning, the filings, the shares, the $4 billion, you will now beg me to provide on my terms instead of yours. All of it grew from a single share certificate that a dying man pressed into the hands of a 24-year-old girl. And from 3 words he taught me at a kitchen table in Newark when I was 9 years old. She let the silence stretch one final time. And then she delivered her father's other lesson, the one she had spent a lifetime proving true. My father used to tell me every night that dignity is leverage. The men in this room never understood that because you have never had to. You confused dignity with weakness. You saw a woman sit quietly on a bench and absorb your insults without raising her voice. And you mistook her stillness for surrender. But that stillness was the leverage. That patience was the trap. You spent 49 minutes this morning congratulating yourselves on putting a black woman in her place. And you never once stopped to ask yourselves what kind of woman sits on that bench, in that coat, holding that folder, and refuses to leave. She picked up her father's share certificate, and she placed it carefully back inside the oxblood folder, next to the Parker pen. Dignity, she said, was always the leverage. You just couldn't see it. You never can. Now, let me tell you what happened to Charles Pendergast, the third, because I know that is what you have been waiting for. And I promise you, it is better than handcuffs. There were no police in that glass room, no marshals, no sirens, no perp, walk for the cameras. Imani Adeyemi did not need any of that. And she knew that the cheap satisfaction of a man in handcuffs would have been beneath the reckoning she had spent 22 years building. What she did to Charles Pendergast was quieter, and it was permanent. She turned to Bennett Ashforth, and she laid out her first condition, the very first, non-negotiable term of any capital her firm would provide. Charles Pendergast would be terminated, not quietly resigned, with a package and a glowing reference, the way men like him always landed softly. Terminated for cause, stripped of his unvested compensation. And his conduct? The lobby. Yes. But more importantly, his signature on the documents that powered the 2-tier machine and his personal role in the retaliation against Marcus Webb would be turned over, in full, to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Attorney General as part of their now active investigations, which meant that Charles Pendergast, a man who had never once in his life been told no by anyone who mattered, was about to learn the difference between an embarrassment and a liability. Because individual executives who personally direct discrimination and retaliate against whistleblowers do not get to hide behind the institution. They get named. They get deposed. They get held personally responsible. The gold cufflinks. The inherited certainty. The 122 years of effortless belonging. None of it would protect him now. Because the one woman with the power to protect him was the woman he had thrown a brochure at 90 minutes earlier. He tried to speak. He started to say her name, started to fumble towards some apology, some appeal, some charming recovery. And Imani Adeyemi held up one hand and stopped him. She did not scream at him. She did not gloat. She simply looked at him with that complete, terrible calm. And she said 6 words. "You should have learned my name." And that was the last thing she ever said to Charles Pendergast. The third, security. The same security he had summoned to remove her, escorted him out of the building that afternoon, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box. The exact same kind of cardboard box that Marcus Webb had carried out 2 years before. Sometimes, friend, the universe writes its own poetry, and all you have to do is hold the door. But here is the part that separates a black story's reckoning from a simple revenge story. Because if all Imani Adeyemi had done that morning was destroy one arrogant man, then the machine would have kept running. A new Pendergast would have taken his chair. The bench would still be in the lobby. The brochures would still be in the rack. And somewhere, another Marcus Webb would still be carrying his box. Imani had not come to remove one man. She had come to break the machine. And so she sat down, finally, in that chair, at the head of the table, opened her father's folder, took out his Parker pen, and she dictated the real terms, the terms upon which $4 billion and the survival of a 122-year-old institution would now depend. The 2-tier system would be dismantled completely. Heritage and Horizon would be collapsed into one single standard of service and one single fair fee schedule. The same for every client, regardless of name or color. Audited quarterly by an independent monitor, reporting directly to her firm every dollar that the Horizon machine had ever overcharged, going back as far as the records existed, would be refunded, with interest. To every single client of color, it had been quietly stolen from Cliven, with a letter, signed by the chairman, explaining exactly what had been done to them and exactly what was being returned. No quiet settlements. No non-disclosure agreements. The truth, in writing, to every family the bank had wronged. The bank would establish and endow permanently a fellowship to bring first-generation and underrepresented young people into finance. Real jobs, real mentorship, real pathways into the rooms that people like her father were locked out of. And it would not be named after the bank, or after a dead Ashforth, or after Imani herself. She named it that morning with her father's pen in her hand. She called it the Elias Adeyemi Fellowship, so that the name they had once tried to erase from the industry would now be the name that opened its doors. And then there was the matter of Marcus Webb. Imani Adeyemi did not let the bank handle Marcus Webb with a memo and a check. Some debts you have to pay in person. That same week, she had him found. Not hard, since he was doing contract bookkeeping for a small nonprofit in Baltimore for a fraction of what he was worth. His Wall Street career strangled in its crib, and she asked him to come to New York, to that building, back to the lobby with the marble and the portraits and the bench. You can imagine what that walk felt like for a 27-year-old man who had last left that building carrying his life in a cardboard box. Told he was difficult. Told he didn't fit. Told, without ever quite being told, that the color of his skin and the inconvenience of his honesty had no place in a 122-year-old institution. You can imagine the dread in his chest as he pushed through those same brass doors. But this time, there was no receptionist pointing two fingers at a bench. This time, Imani Adeyemi herself was standing in that lobby, waiting for him. Beneath the very portraits that had looked down on his humiliation, and when Marcus Webb walked in, uncertain, braced for more pain, she crossed the marble floor toward him, and she extended her hand, and she said 3 words to him. Not the 3 words she had said to a boardroom. Gantlarwones, the 3 words that every person who has ever been erased by a powerful institution aches their whole life to hear. She looked Marcus Webb in the eye, and she said, "I see you. I see what you found. I see what it cost you to say it out loud. I see that you did the right thing in a building that punishes the right thing, and I see that they made you pay for your courage. With 2 years of your life, I see you, Marcus, and I came back so that no one in this building could ever look through you again." And that young man, who had carried himself with such careful armor through that whole terrible walk, stood in the middle of that marble cathedral and wept, not from grief, this time, but from the almost unbearable relief of finally being seen. Marcus Webb's resignation was reclassified. His personnel file was corrected. Every false performance concern struck from the record. The truth entered in its place. He received 2 years of back pay, in full, plus damages. The whispers that had blacklisted him across the industry were retracted, in writing, by the chairman himself. And then Imani Adeyemi offered him a job. Not his old junior analyst chair, but a real one, with a title and a mandate and teeth. Marcus Webb was made the head of the bank's new Fair Practices Oversight Office, reporting independently, with the authority to audit exactly the kind of machine he had once been destroyed for exposing. The man they erased for finding the discrimination was now the man in charge of making sure it never happened again. And then there was the lobby itself, the wall of oil portraits, 5 generations of Ashforth men in dark suits, every one of them painted to look down on whoever walked through the door, was taken down. Imani did not have them destroyed. That, too, would have been beneath the reckoning. They were moved to a private archive upstairs, to be remembered honestly, including the things they had done. And on that great marble wall in the lobby, where dead billionaires had once looked down on living people and judged them, the bank hung something new. It hung a growing wall of photographs of the young men and women of the Elias Adeyemi Fellowship, the first-generation kids, the immigrants' children, the ones who would never again be sorted onto a bench. And in the very center of that wall, framed and lit and impossible to miss, was a single yellowed share certificate from a company called Adeyemi Mills, so that everyone who walked into that 122-year-old bank, for as long as it stood, would see the name they had once tried to erase, and would have to look it in the eye. Now, let me tell you how it all settled. In the weeks and the months that followed, because the consequences of that gray Tuesday morning rolled far beyond the marble walls of one bank, the investigations did not go away. They never do. Once they are live, and the evidence is that clean, the Securities and Exchange Commission and the New York State Attorney General pursued the Heritage and Horizon scheme in earnest, and when the details became public, The two-tier system, the $40 million a year quietly extracted from families of color. The sorting of human beings by appearance into the tier where they could be charged the most and respected the least. It became one of the defining financial discrimination cases of the decade. Ashforth Vane paid an enormous penalty on top of the refunds it owed its clients. And here is the part that mattered most to Imani. Every other white shoe firm in the city, watching what happened to Ashforth Vane, was suddenly, urgently, reading its own footnotes, quietly auditing its own tiers, asking itself whether its own lobby had its own bench. One reckoning, properly built, does not punish one institution. It puts an entire industry on notice. Across the city, benches quietly disappeared from lobbies. Two-tier fee schedules were dismantled before anyone could be caught running them. And more than one firm refunded clients it had wronged, simply because it had seen, in real time, what honesty cost. The bank that got caught? That was always the point. Charles Pendergast III never worked in finance again. The investigations named him personally. The depositions were brutal. The certainty that had carried him effortlessly through 53 years of life did not survive contact with consequences. He spent the years that followed exactly as far from marble lobbies as a man can get. And the gold cufflinks did not save him, because they had never been worth anything at all. Bennett Ashforth, to the surprise of nearly everyone, did not fight her. The old man was many things. But at 71, staring at the ruin his family's bank had become and the truth of what it had done to people like Imani Adeyemi, something in him chose, at the very end of his career, to do the one decent thing left available to him. He signed every term Imani put in front of him. He signed the refund letters personally. All of them. Every name. By hand. He stood beside her at the dedication of the Imani Adeyemi Fellowship, and he said, out loud, in front of cameras, the words his ancestors had spent 122 years refusing to say, that the institution he led had been wrong, that it had wronged people, and that it was his responsibility to make it right. It did not undo what was done, but Imani let him have it, because a reckoning leaves room for a man to choose, at the last, to be better than the men who made him. One of those refund letters went to a 73-year-old retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Okonkwo. It arrived in a plain envelope on an ordinary afternoon, and inside it was a letter, signed by the chairman's own hand, explaining in plain language what the bank had quietly done to her across 31 years, and a check returning every dollar it had taken from her, with interest, more than $400,000. The savings of 2 working lifetimes, finally made whole. They say the old woman sat down at her kitchen table and read that letter 3 times before she let herself believe it. And then she wept. And then she did something that tells you everything about the kind of person your machine had been stealing from all along. She gave a portion of it away to a scholarship fund at the school where she had taught for 40 years. Because that, friend, is who was on the other side of those numbers. Not abstractions. People with more grace than the institution that wronged them ever deserved. And Diane Okafor, the chairman's assistant of 26 years, the one woman in that building who had crossed a marble lobby and knelt down and dared to actually see the woman on the bench. Diane Okafor did not stay an assistant. Imani saw to that. Within the year, Diane was named Chief of Staff of the recapitalized institution, with a seat in the rooms where the decisions were actually made. The rooms she had served from the outside for a quarter of a century because Imani Adeyemi understood something her father had taught her. That the people who recognize your dignity when you have nothing to offer them are the people you lift up first when you have everything. And do you remember that white couple in Kashmir, the ones escorted upstairs in 90 seconds with a warm handshake and an offer of espresso? While Imani sat on the bench, it turned out the gentleman was an old heritage client. Decades deep. When the refund letters went out, his did too. Except his was different, because the audit revealed that even some of the old families had been quietly steered and shortchanged in ways they never knew. And the new single fare standard meant his fees, like everyone's, were now simply honest. He wrote the bank a letter. He said he had banked there for 40 years and never once questioned how the place worked, because it had always worked for him. And he said that learning what had been done to other clients in his name, under the same roof, had shamed him. Sometimes, friend, the reckoning reaches. Even the people who thought they were on the right side of the marble, sometimes that is how a thing actually changes. Let me jump forward with you now, to about a year and a half. After that gray Tuesday in November, there is a young woman who walks into the lobby of that bank most mornings now. She is 23, the daughter of Haitian immigrants, the first in her family to wear a suit to work, and she is a fellow of the Imani Adeyemi program. She does not know that she walks across the same marble where a man named Elias was once strangled by a smile, or where his daughter once sat on a bench for 49 minutes holding his folder. She only knows that when she walks in, the wall in front of her is covered with the faces of people who look like her, and that in the center of it all is an old certificate from a company called Adeyemi Mills, and that nobody has ever once pointed her toward a bench. Marcus Webb runs his oversight office down the hall. He has hired 3 more analysts who remind him of himself. He keeps a single empty cardboard box on a shelf in his office, flattened, where he can see it. People ask him why. He tells them it is to remember what almost happened and what it cost to make sure it didn't. And Imani Adeyemi, she controls the institution, but she rarely sets foot in it. She does not need to. She never did interviews about any of it, never wrote the book, never took the magazine cover, never stood in the spotlight. Her reckoning could have bought her. When people who do not understand her ask why a woman would do all that and then disappear, she gives the same answer she gave from the start. She says it was never about being seen by them. It was about making sure her father was. It was about going back for what was lost. And carrying it forward, she still carries the oxblood folder. The Parker pen is still inside it. And on the nights when the work is done and the books are balanced, she still hears her father's voice at that kitchen table in Newark, tapping the ledger with one finger, telling a 9-year-old girl the only 3 words she ever really needed: dignity is leverage. He was right. He was right the whole time. And the men in that marble cathedral never saw it coming, because they could not imagine that the quiet woman they left waiting on the bench was holding the most powerful thing in the entire building. Not the $4 billion, not the controlling shares. Her dignity, her patience, her refusal to become small in a room built to shrink her. That was the leverage. It always was. And that my friends, is how Imani Adeyemi went back, looked them dead in the eye, and reclaimed everything they thought they had taken for good. So let me ask you something. Before you go, have you ever walked into a room where they had already decided exactly who you were? Before you said a single word, where they looked right through you, the way they looked through Elias, and the way they looked through Imani on that bench? I want you to tell me about it down in the comments. I read them. This community reads them, and there is power in being seen by people who understand. Her father told her that dignity is leverage. So tell me, what 3 words got you through the moment someone underestimated you? Drop them below. Let's build a wall of them. Right here. The way Imani built hers. If this story moved you, if you felt that reckoning land the way it was meant to, then do me a favor and hit that like button, because it genuinely helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them most. And if you are new here, if this is your first time watching Dignity take back power on this channel, then subscribe and turn on the bell, because every single week we bring you another story of hidden strength, turning the tables on the arrogant, of quiet people who were underestimated by loud ones, and of justice, real justice, the kind that doesn't just punish one man, but breaks the whole machine. Next week, we have a story about a janitor who cleaned the same executive floor for 19 years. Invisible to every person who stepped over his cart, until the morning the entire company discovered who he really was and what he had been quietly watching all that time. You are not going to want to miss it. But until then, remember what Elias Adeyemi taught his daughter at a kitchen table in Newark? Remember it the next time someone looks right through you and decides you are nobody. Remember it the next time you are made to wait on a bench that was built to make you small. Hold your back straight, keep your hands folded, and never, ever let them mistake your stillness for surrender. Because dignity is leverage. It always was.